what is the demon of fear?
Technically speaking, it's actually Beelzebub, which, as you know from your interviews with Dan, it's the Lucifer and Beelzebub and Satan are the same demon, and he's the demon of fear because of the fact that fear is defined as the perception of a future evil over which you cannot overcome. So there's some evil that's coming down the pike. You see it coming, and intellectually, and you can't get away from it. Well, in my dealings with him, he says he lives in Beelzebub says he lives in chronic fear. And the reason he lives in chronic fear, he said, is because, and it's also the same reason why he's exhausted. He spends all this time hyper-focusing on everything that's possibly going on because he said God broadsides me a lot of times. So a lot of times I'm focusing on this particular thing, and then the next thing I know, I just get broadsided because they do not have access to the divine economy of grace. They don't know what graces God's going to give to people, and as a result, the demons get taken to the woodshed. And so he's fearful of getting basically beat up in relationship to that. The other part about it is that they have a conscience, and their conscience bothers them. And they also have a sense of shame for what they actually do. They even mention
the demons have a conscience.
Yes.
And they feel shame.
And they feel shame. They know what they've done is wrong. They'll admit as much in session. And that is actually, other than the fact that they don't get to see God, that's their greatest suffering, is this pang of conscience of the evil that they've actually done. Beelzebub's even admitted to me in session that every time he gets someone to fall, he gets a sadistic delight out of it, but it increases his shame in knowing that he's that much lower of an individual for having done that. And so part of their fear, one of their massive fears, is being revealed or found out about their interior lives in relation to human beings. Just as we would, if people found out our deepest, darkest secret, we would feel shame or embarrassed. They have that same thing, but it's even worse for them because of the fact that they know that a final judgment's going to come, where not just at our private judgment when we die, but God's going to assemble everybody at the final judgment. And every evil thing they've ever done will be known by everybody. So they have a tremendous amount of fear. Shame is defined as fear of being perceived as lowly.
That's interesting that they feel shame. So would it be possible for a demon to come to Christ and to
No.
It's not. Once it's in, it's over for eternity.
Yeah, because when they make their choice, well, I should say this, none of their sorrow or even their fear, but none of their sorrow is to a purpose of amendment. They have no intention of getting their act together. So basically when they made their choice, because they were created, when they were first created, the first instance, when they were created into a state of full comprehensive knowing. So they actually knew who they were, what their nature was, because they could actually see their nature. Whereas human beings, we have to infer what human nature is. They could actually see it. By that, they also knew what their assigned task was. God created them for a specific task, a mission, you could say, that they had to do. And that mission determines that means that one angel is actually essentially different from another one because they have a natural law. They have inclinations along that line. So, but then he also created them, he infused all the knowledges of the essences of created things that were going to ever exist. They didn't know the particulars that would unfold over history necessarily, but they did know all the essence. So they know what a tree is, what a human being is. This is why they're so adept at taking people out, because they understand human nature so well. Okay, so they were created in this state, but that means that unlike human beings, we got to wake up and drink some coffee and kind of get our act together before we can actually think anything of any depth, right? Well, not with them. They were instantaneously fully comprehended all of that. They knew what their task was. They knew what the reward would be if they were faithful to that, which would basically get to see him for all eternity and be in eternal happiness. Or they would also know what their eternal punishment would be if they did not do it. That means they had full, absolute comprehension. Now, the reason God cuts us slack as human beings is because we're stupid, right? We are. We're just stupid. And so that's why God's like, okay, you're stupid. And so when we're contrite, it's because our wills aren't fixed, because when we make a choice, we don't have that full kind of comprehension they did. Mm-hmm. We just, later we realize, oh, that was just dumb, right? And so because of our lack of knowledge, we don't have that same level of knowledge where they had full comprehension. Now, St. Thomas says that their will is proportionate to their intellect, which basically means that when their intellect understands something, when they make a choice, it's proportionate to that thing, which meant that when they made their choice of being with God or not, of doing their task or not, they were all in. And that means their will became completely fixed in malice.
Wow.
In fact, it's funny because I actually had a case where this kind of thing came out, because I said, okay, so let me get this straight. So you were I was dealing with this demon. So you were created to have the beatific vision, yeah, and you were created to have this phenomenal task of enlightening people's minds, yeah, and you were created to have all these perfections that would surround that, and you'd be able to influence people for the good, yeah. And you knew if you didn't do this, you'd end up in hell for all eternity. Yeah, and it would bother you for all eternity, that you would just hate yourself and because when they rejected their task, remember, their task is who they are. And that means, but they made their choice. It was perfect self-hatred, and you knew you'd hate yourself for all eternity. Yeah. And I said, and you'd do it again? And he said, yeah, I would.
Wow.
And basically what it comes down to is there was a perfection that they saw that they wanted that wasn't part of their particular nature that they wanted. And they had to be willing to sacrifice that in order to have the beatific vision, which is a greater good. So they had to sacrifice the lesser good for the greater good. And they were unwilling to sacrifice that particular thing. So they literally chose a figment of their imagination, because they knew they'd never have it. They chose that over reality.